Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I would like to welcome. Tammi GAW. She is an amazingly talented attorney, athletic trainer, and advocate. So welcome, Tammi.
Thank you.
So firstly, I would like to say congratulations on all your achievements. Tammi, you have been involved in the sporting industry for over 20 years. Can you please share with us about your journey?
Sure. So I started off in sports medicine. It's known as an athletic trainer in the US, which some people confuse with a personal trainer that gets you in shape. But it's more similar for the rest of the world to as a working physio. So I started off there in the mid-90s, worked mostly at the college level with football and baseball teams until about 2004. And then I decided inexplicably at the time to go to law school.
Oh,
so
wow.
I quit my job, sold my house, and went to law school. Yeah, it was interesting. I was much older than most of the people in my class, so that was an experience in and of itself. I graduated in 2007 and passed the bar right at the kickoff of the global recession. So I had gone to school in Los Angeles and wrote the bar exam out here. So I had to create a network from scratch. I'd been in LA for 10 years. And so I had a recession and needed a job and had student loans and had to create a network from scratch. So that was an interesting experience as well. But I worked as an attorney for a nonprofit for a while, focusing on U.S. foreign policy and its effect on the African continent and the Africa diaspora. So nothing really to do with sports, although I got to watch I'm not sure I ever told you this, I got to watch some of the games, including the kickoff game for the World Cup in South Africa at the South African Embassy.
Oh, wow.
had a brie down right in the morning, 7 o'clock kickoff. It was wonderful. Just as a side note. But I focused on policy around things like international sovereign debt litigation and that kind of thing. So it was very meaningful work for me. But in 2012, I came to the reality that both the not-for-profit was not going to pay my student loans and that I missed sports. And I knew when I went to law school that I knew I wasn't going to be an agent. There were certain things going into school that I didn't want to do. And most of that had to do with my experience with agents working for the college football teams. And that's not at all how they are now. They're much more regulated, but it was really shady in the 90s. And so I knew I didn't necessarily want to do that. But I decided to come back and use the combination of the medicine and law to do something in more of the policy and advocacy space. We think there's only 9 or 10 of us in the world that have the same certifications, have these 2 certifications. So, it's kind of we joke that we're going to get jackets made and have a little club. But I started a consulting firm, Advantage Rule, to serve as the umbrella organization of all of the work that I do, the speaking and things like that. So I started working on policy and education around amateur athletes and college athletes' rights. So that's where we find ourselves now. Is I spend a lot of time talking about cartels and athletes' rights, access to healthcare and benefits and things like that.
Amazing. So that leads me to the next question. So how as an attorney, athletic trainer, and advocate, how have these industries cross-pollinated, and how has this given you an advantage, especially as a woman in a male-dominated industry?
Well, you're right. Sports law and sports medicine tend to be fairly male-dominated. But in my entire career, I've always been one of the few women in my work circles. Fortunately and happily, that's getting to be less true. There's some amazing women in the sports arena, obviously.
Yes.
But as far as the cross-pollination, there's actually lately been a lot more crossover in the issue around sports than you might think. Concussions, for instance, is, there are times I joke that it depends on what hat I put on, because there are times when I speak to medical folks and I put on my legal hat so they understand what's going on with the concussion litigation. And then there's times when I speak to legal folks and I put on my medical hat so that they understand the medical side of the concussions. So I think what makes me, I sort of fell into being even more unique on that, is that I can switch hats between teaching those. And particularly in the US, where we have a completely dysfunctional health insurance system, issues around medicine and health coverage creep into the collective bargaining agreements that the leagues make with current and former players. The concussion litigation, as I said, there's an underpinning of medicine in a lot of the legal work that goes on around here.
Yes, makes sense. So what have been some of your biggest lessons and learnings, both in the business and legal arena, that you have applied in the world of sports and vice versa?
Well, it may sound kind of strange, but one of the biggest is it's something I still struggle to tamp down sometimes.
Yes.
We talked about, women are still the minority in my field. And when I first started in sports, I was always kind of trying to be one of the guys, Don't get me wrong. I have a ton of what are conventionally seen as women's interests. I have a lot of what are conventionally seen as guys' interests, and I reject that stereotype anyway. But a few years ago, I really kind of came into it really hit me as I was at a conference in Portland, that I went, what I bring to the table as an incredibly unique woman is actually leverage for the work that I do. And I should stand strong on that and not try and blend into the crowd. And since then, that's informed a lot of the way that I approach when I propose business deals with people. When I propose, I've called up and just called CEOs and said, I really think that I need to be on your board because you don't have anybody speaking in this space, and it's worked. So I think that was probably one of the things, the biggest lessons, is that I am a very unique individual with a very unique background. And I think I spent too long trying to blend into that crowd. So as strange as that answer is, I think that's probably my biggest lesson.
Well, I mean, that's amazing. And also, I think the thing especially that I feel being, having connected with you, and I think that this is something that a lot of women can look up to or follow from you, is the fact that you're very confident and strong in yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's lacking with women, because often, like if you walk into a room full of men, it can be intimidating. And,
Sure.
So I think from my perspective and what I see with you is that you could be and are a serious role model for a lot of women.
Well, I hope so. I've made my share of mistakes, and by made, I mean as recent as last week. Nobody is nobody is perfect.
No.
But yeah, I think that I think my experiences and my learning curve have helped me when I try and do mentoring and things, because I can look at these young people, both men and women, and just say, it's not that bad. Like,
No.
think outside the box. There are answers here. So yeah.
Of course. So currently there is a lot of emphasis on leadership. What does leadership mean to you, and how has being an amazing leader in your own right, and what do you feel that differentiates you from others, and what is your unique skill set in terms of leadership? This
is one of my favorite questions, because I think that people have even the right responses for leadership can sometimes sound a little canned because we're convinced that there's only a certain number of types of leaders that are, allowed to function in any given space. But to me, leadership is it's a commitment to the goal of whatever you're pursuing, but with the priority of enabling your team to succeed.
Yes.
So I've had horrendous bosses, sometimes because of their own insecurities, among other things, and they were intent on keeping the team members down and under their thumbs, really aggressive and hostile work environments.
Yes.
But some of my most successful leadership qualities come out of a commitment to not being some of the horrendous bosses that I've had.
Yes.
Combined with watching and learning from other really great leaders.
Yes.
So, people that I may not have necessarily worked for, but when I look at them and I see how their team reacts to them and how they can pursue, whatever the goal is, whether it be a business goal, a personal, professional goal, that kind of thing. When I watch them do that, I take away as much as I can from what I see them doing. And I think that's been really helpful. So I'm known for having very high expectations. Like I'm a collegial person and I joke around a lot, but anyone that's worked for me knows that I have very high expectations.
Yes.
But I'm also known for making sure my team members know that they have my confidence and that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if they do well, we all do well.
Of course.
And the idea of giving them opportunities to advance and giving them space to screw up. I have an intern working for me right now who wants to write on something that she doesn't have a lot of experience in. So she has dug in and is learning about, some legal things around antitrust that she's never had experience with.
Yes.
And she's writing for me, to try, and she wants to get something published. And she's not afraid to come to me and say, I think this is what this says. And I can say, yeah, that's great. You're on the right track. Or no, that's not actually how that principle works, but go back and try it. And she doesn't feel like I've defeated her or told her she's stupid. She's working through it and learning a lot. And she is going to be wonderfully successful in whatever industry she goes into. But that would have been important to me at that age. And so I really internalize that and try and bring that to my leadership style. And I'm known for my sense of humor. So a lot of times I can use that. I think that helps a lot.
You have to have both,
people at ease.
definitely.
Yeah. And it just, people take themselves too seriously. And so sometimes you got to crack a joke. Yeah. Appropriate jokes, of course.
Of course.
But, crack a joke.
Of course. So you have brought your knowledge of sports to the other side of the locker room. Can you please share with us a little more about that?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that, my years of firsthand experience in the multiple aspects of college sports, not just the medicine, but, I worked with and around the sports information directors and the various people that involved in game day management, because at the time they were my friends, but I was also fascinated about what they did. So when I come to the table, I have a much more holistic understanding of how the business works now on both sides of the locker room doors. So when people say, and I get this, I mean, you've seen it, Twitter is such a lovely place. We comment on college sports, and you get the go in the kitchen and make me a sandwich crowd, which is always funny because those people have clearly never tasted my cooking. So jokes on them. But these are people that got cut from their high school football team and never got over it. Whereas I've spent time, in and around the areas in which I speak. So I think that being able to come in and know that I know what both sides of that look like has been really helpful. And the business of amateur sports in general, not just college sports, which is of course a sort of a US centric concept, the idea of our quote amateur college sports, but also in Olympic sports. The business of amateur sports is a multi-headed hydra. So you kind of have to know how all of those heads fit into the larger beast. And I think that having come from the medicine side and going into the law, you know, and being able to walk back and forth across that has helped.
Yes, absolutely. So as an attorney, what would you say have been your biggest challenges you have faced, and also some of your biggest successes? And can you please share with us that process?
Yeah, I think, so sometimes I also get asked to come and speak to law students who are struggling.
Okay.
And I think that that's been, again, one of these times where I can take what was a real struggle for me and turn it into a positive. As soon as I took my first law school exam, I mean, I knew the info, I felt good about the tests, you know, I had my outlines, all of these things that you have in law school. And then I got C's on the exam, which was really discouraging to me because I've always been I'm an oldest child in every tick the box way. So I'm a very high achiever.
Yeah.
Graduate student of the year, dean's list, you know, all of these things. But it was a torts professor who realized after I had made, because I came in and sat in his office and said, I don't understand. And he looked at my test and he goes, I don't understand. And so we looked at each other, not understanding. And I made some throwaway comment about how I probably said something like how cadaver anatomy was easier than this or something like that. And he just sat back and he went, oh, well, that explains it. And I'm looking at him going, can I know why this explains it? And he said, people that come from the medical side, we see this problem with them in law school. Because when you rule something out, if you're looking at a knee and you're looking to see if someone's torn their ACL, when you realize that they haven't torn their ACL, you move on to the next thing. And you don't address it again. Whereas in law school, which brings up an entirely different conversation about why law school exams are in no way an indication of how well someone will function as a practicing attorney. You know, you have to go back and talk about all these options. So, you know, I knew the info, I just wasn't putting it on the paper. And so I think that was, you know, that was a struggle that I've been able to work people through because, you know, I didn't get, you know, dean's list in law school. I didn't graduate summa cum laude at all, but I passed the bar on the first time and was the in-house counsel at a nonprofit less than 3 years after I graduated.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
it's not,
you know,
it's not all about you know, academics and grades. It's actually about the ability to execute and be versatile in each case or each situation.
Yeah, I've never seen anyone win a court case because they can vomit information on a paper asked by an academic in 20 minutes.
Yeah, true. So as you have extensive experience in sports medicine, law, and your passion for advocacy, can you share with us more about the advocacy and what are some of the most rewarding aspects of your advocacy?
Sure. As I said earlier, that I didn't go to law school to be an agent. I also didn't go to law school to be a trial attorney or some big partner in a big firm, you know, working 90-hour weeks or anything like that. That was never, I mean, I joked that, you know, I worked so many hours in medicine that I was the only person that went to law school for a break in my schedule.
Great.
And I was only sort of kidding. I mean, that is true.
Yeah.
So I became a lawyer because I've always had a tendency to fight for people that I think are getting a raw deal. When that was in medicine, sometimes the insurance companies would be battling, saying that an athlete didn't need this, or they were just being bean counters, and why we need them, I do not know. But so that was always kind of been an underpinning of how I approached everything. So it kind of made perfect sense that after all the unfair situations that I saw in college sports, that I would go on to be someone and work in a space where I can use my voice and my privilege to elevate those issues. Because a lot of times people don't speak, they don't listen to what the athletes say because they just don't know how good they have it. Or the athletes feel like they can't speak out loud because, of course, they could lose their scholarship or sponsorship for various things. You know, these kind of situations.
It's almost like an intimidation tactic, almost.
Yeah, it is. And so um, I have a voice, and I have the privilege to be able to say these things and say them on a stage. And so I think that that's the advocacy side has always been much more my speed. So I have the background and the training to go behind it, but it's really a public policy
Yes.
scenario.
Amazing. So you're in an extremely unique position as a woman, and to be able to love what you do. When you chose to pursue this path and career, how did you manage this in a very male-dominated industry? And what would your advice be to other women who would like to pursue the same path? And do you feel women are more supported now than they were when they started? And then that leads me on to the following question, which is, do you still feel we have a long way to go in such a male-dominated industry?
I mean, I always think we have a long way to go. We're recording this on the 4th of July in the United States, and I'm in Washington, D.C. So we're in a very, very interesting time right now. So it can always be. I think that there always needs to be more support and advancement for people of all. We've been speaking in sort of a male and female, but as much opposition as some women have faced in the industry, that doesn't talk about the further subsets of people of color, non-binary people, LGBTQ. There are various other identities and really talented skill sets of people that face an even tougher time coming into it. So it's not just necessarily supporting just women, but it's the idea that the painting, it's not the manuscript. What am I looking at? The giant painting is better when there are a lot of different colors on it and a lot of different shapes. And so it's about getting all of those other people from different shapes into the masterpiece. So I don't necessarily think that I set out to necessarily, quote, navigate the male domination. I think it came that I'm just a naturally stubborn person.
Yes.
And so, in a lot of
we
situations,
need that, right? We need that.
Well, and I think it was just what I had. Yeah. Yeah. I just, in a lot of situations, I'll just press through because I won't let anybody tell me I can't.
Yeah.
So, for other women and for people that don't fit into the typical, white male space that is sports law, particularly, I recommend that they find, everybody always says a mentor, and that's great, but I don't think people talk enough about masterminds.
No.
And finding a group of people that they can see the success that they want to achieve. That kind of thing. A lot of times people want to do something that they don't necessarily see. I had to create my own space because there wasn't really a space that operated that I wanted to do. So I had to make it. My career didn't follow a single predictable line. So for me, it was important that I connect with people that validated that taking a unique path was okay. So maybe it's not somebody in your specific industry, but look at the wider scale business and see if you could find somebody that did something somewhat unconventional and realize that they navigated that space in their own way.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So how and what is your ultimate vision for yourself and creating legacy? I believe you are definitely a trailblazer in such a unique career and industry. Is mentoring other young women. Is this something that you would consider?
Oh yeah, I mean, my legacy is absolutely to have made the world a better place than when I set foot on it. That's the legacy I want. I don't necessarily know how that will look, but that is absolutely the legacy. And I do mentor as much as I can while still managing my calendar. But I also look for opportunities to connect other people. I claim that I'm a a professional facilitator, because I have my hands in so many different buckets that if somebody comes up, you know, and they're like, I really wish that I knew this, I can go, oh, well, you should talk to this person over here.
Yeah.
And I think that's been one mentoring. But, you know, sometimes the random messages that I'll get that say, this is sort of out of the blue, but do you know anybody that works in fill in the blank? And I can go, hey, you should talk to so-and-so. So I, you know, again, it goes back to recognizing my privilege. I recognize that I operate in a certain space of privilege, and the idea that I can pull as many other women up as I can is that's what the game's all about.
Amazing. So your unconventional, unique career has given you the opportunity, in-house counsel positions, non-profit management, board positions, and C-suite level work with integrated planning for large and medium-scale sporting events. Can you please share with us a little more about that and how this came about?
Well, it all goes back to networking and relationships, all of it. My last VP job for the organizing committee of the multi-venue large-scale event, I got because a colleague who works in sports video production knew that I was looking for certain C-suite gigs. She knew that I was interested if they were out there. I didn't need them, but she always knew that in the back of her head. And she introduced me to someone who was hiring for the position in a bar.
Wow.
So when people say, how did you get this job? I can look at them and go, in a bar. You know, it's just, and that is true. Most of the jobs or the contracts that I've gotten have been through personal relationships. And again, when you have the background that I have, you don't fit into the corporate world's nice little boxes. And sometimes LinkedIn gets confused about exactly what you are, you know, and that kind of thing. So, so I've had to forge my own way after a fashion. But it's definitely the relationships and the networking. You know, spend time figuring out whether there's something out there that you like to do, and then, you know, find your own route there if you have to.
Yes, absolutely. So well, this leads me to the next question. So sexual harassment is a very big challenge for a lot of women these days across many different industries, but the sporting industry seems to have a reputation for this. Have you personally experienced this? And why in this digital world do men think in high-powered positions, whether they're founders, co-founders, or otherwise management positions, do you think this is still, and why do you think this is still happening? And what is your advice to women? And is this something you have had to deal with within your career?
Well, I don't know a single woman that hasn't had to deal with this in her career. I don't know a single woman online that hasn't had to deal with this. I don't know a single woman with a cell phone who hasn't had to deal with this. And you know, the stories I have could fill a book.
Yes.
Where say that, and I look at them kind of confused. I'm like, no, the worst by far has been in the office side of things.
Yes.
You know, and not just actual harassment, but the dismissive way that some men will treat women in power.
Yes.
But, you know, in the locker rooms, I lost track of how many times that, you know, even if one of the guys said something, you know, that was really inappropriate, because there's certain, I make my own locker room jokes, but somebody said something really inappropriate that I've watched their teammates come and slap them upside the back of the head and put them in check. You know, by far the athletes are not, in my experience, certainly not the problem. There are far more good ones than there are bad ones. You know, but I think they get the negative attention.
Yes.
It's the front office. I shouldn't say the front office, but it's the business side of the office that I think tends to be problematic. And the advice is hard. You know, when people say, what advice would you give? It's hard because, you know, it goes back to my privilege. I understand that sometimes women and men starting out don't feel like they have the space or power to stand up for themselves, because sometimes it is. I mean, it is a cost benefit analysis. You can say something and stand up, and the reality is it might cost you your job.
Yeah.
And not everyone is in a position where that's an easy decision to make. You know, we go back to, it's not just the men and women, the people of color, LGBTQ folks, undocumented, people that have undocumented status. That's a big problem in here right now, because there are people that are undocumented in our country, the United States, that are, you know, they are worried about reporting things to the police because of their status. So there are people that are even more, that have additional struggles that, you know, are even outside of the typical business. But I think having more women and other groups that represent unconventional or minority groups in positions of power will help. That I think is one of the things that we should always be working forward, is just having a more diverse management scene that cuts through some of the old, you know, the good old boy network. But, you know, it's also important to tell people that are in a position of being harassed that they're not alone. I think that's been one of the very positive things that I have noticed coming out of the Me Too movement, that was started so powerfully by Tarana Burke and has gained momentum with more attention over the last few years. That the idea that you know, it must only be you, and you don't have anyone else that's going through what you're going through. I think having that out of the shadows has been helpful. So it's a constant struggle, and it's something that we still have to pursue, being just working towards in all businesses, in all industries, but, you know, specifically conventionally dominated industries like sports.
Thank you. So what has been some of your biggest career highlights?
Well, I think the biggest career highlight had to be not even in sports. I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things in sports, but when I was working in the foreign policy space, I actually got to address members of parliament in Westminster.
Wow, amazing.
I know. Yes, half of my family is English, and so my gran was absolutely over the moon. She could not stop telling people that her granddaughter was going to Westminster. So that I wish I had more pictures of that. But then, you know, the first time I held the copy of the book, the picture on the back of it still gives me shivers. That will probably come and rear its ugly head at me for the rest of my life. But I would say those are two of probably my biggest highlights, because, you know, I'm holding something in my hand that I made, and that was really special.
Amazing. So you're also a speaker and author and have traveled all over the world. Was this a natural transition for you? And has this opened other doors for you that you didn't necessarily expect?
It has definitely opened doors, because again, people will look at me and go, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think people like you existed." And I go, "Oh, there are some people like us. You should give us more chances to speak." But public speaking has never come naturally to me. So that is a constant effort to be more and more comfortable on stage. I mean, I used to throw up in plants before I went out there. And people could tell me that, "Oh, well, you look so relaxed." I said, "I didn't know I was that good of an actress." That's fantastic.
It's amazing.
So yeah, but it is travel in and of itself. You know, you mentioned getting to travel over the world. That's in my DNA.
Yes.
So I'll never be satisfied until I can, you know, travel everywhere. But I do think that the public speaking, even if it's not, you know, keynote speeches and things like that, but the panels that I've been on, and people go, you know, it's been great to engage with different panelists, because that's I mean, I think if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Absolutely.
So, you know, being able to put yourself in those positions is great. But yes, it's definitely opened up doors. And the, you know, the unconventional career track has too, if for no other reason than people just look at me and ask questions. Like, what?
Yes. And that leads me to the last question. What are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to both entrepreneurs and other industry-related individuals?
Well, my number one that I always say is get a mastermind. Find you the small group of people that are on your level or slightly above to bounce ideas off of. And it doesn't have to be in your industry. In fact, I personally recommend finding people outside of your bubble.
Yes.
Not only because you can get their input and perspective that can be so valuable, but also if you're not, there's something that happens in a mastermind when you're not competing with the people in your space.
Yes.
You can feel more comfortable in just throwing ideas out there and seeing what sticks. So that is the number one thing, is find a mastermind. You know, there are people who aren't creative enough to see that things can be done in any way other than the way they were told they had to do it.
Yes.
And some people are bitter about that. You know, they're looking, going, well, I had to do this, so should you. And that's just factually incorrect.
Yeah.
So, you know, definitely don't just burn the whole thing to the ground. I mean, unless you want to, in which case send me tickets, because I'm always up for a good institution burning.
Yeah.
But you know, don't let them take their advice, marinate on it for a moment, and then make your own decisions. So that is the third or the second. And I have to tell you, the third, when you told me this was one of the questions, I thought about it. I was like, well, what would I say? Because I don't necessarily use this one a lot, but I recommend keeping your life simple. And I recommend this for everybody.
Yes, I agree, 100%.
Well, and you travel like I do as well. You travel more than I do. But I'm constantly talking to people who wish they could have made a professional change. They wish they could go out on their own. They wish they could, you know, move. They wish they could take this sort of shift, maybe go to school, do all of these things, but they have too much debt or they feel trapped by their stuff.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's the biggest thing that holds everybody back.
I think so too. And, you know, I think that the best thing that forward-thinking and unconventional professionals can do is strive for simplicity, because it's better for your finances. It costs, a lot of money to move.
Yes,
you know, and people.
Or just get rid of all your things and have a suitcase like I do.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm still setting up the eBay stuff for some of my sports things that I'm getting rid of. But it's also better for the planet. Just don't buy so much crap.
Yeah.
but it's the simplicity that it makes you feel less trapped, but also you can do a lot of things when you're not tied down by credit card debt and things like that. So that's my favorite one that doesn't get pulled out very often, but I think it applies to everyone all over the world in whatever industry and whatever age.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Tammi, for your time, and thank you for joining us on the Talent Finders podcast, and hopefully we can have you back in the future. And
great, thank you.
Thank you.